Welcome to You Are From God, where we open the Bible and learn to see the image of God in ourselves and the people around us. I'm Scott Taylor.
And I'm Tyler Hall. Thanks for joining us today. Have you ever had a situation in your life where you're just looking to blame somebody? And it's not even like a vindictive, like I have to really get this particular person. You just want to understand maybe who's to blame. And I think, Scott, when we come to the story we're looking at today from the scriptures, the disciples are going to ask a question in John chapter 9 that is understandable. I mean, we see a lot of the scriptures, Old Testament and here in the New, where people try to understand the problems that they face in life, and they just want a reason. I mean, you think about Job, you think about David, and understanding why do the wicked get away with so much, and I'm here trying to live God's life, and I'm being persecuted, or my children are turning against me, and all these different things that he goes through. And so when Jesus and his disciples are walking by, this, we'll call it the blame game, trying to figure out the reason for bad things happening to good people, or what just people in general, without any sort of good or bad conversation. In John chapter 9, in the first two verses, as he was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So this is the conversation that kind of sets off this whole thing. And I can almost imagine, it talks about Jesus here being the one he sees a man blind from birth. So again, just thinking about the compassion of our Savior we've been talking about the last few episodes, I can almost see that they're walking along, and Jesus is the one who notices him first. The others might just be quick to glance right over him. They're busy going where they're going, and Jesus stops and he's kind of looking at him. And then the disciples realize what he's looking at, and so they might just chime in, "Hey, Rabbi, you're focused on this guy. Can you just, tell us who is to blame for this situation? This is a terrible a man born blind." And so for the Jews, especially if you think about Job, an ancient text in biblical comparison of the time of the Bible was written, even Job's friends are thinking, okay, something bad had to have happened in order for Job to be suffering this way. So for somebody to be born that way, you haven't even done anything yet, and you come into the world born blind. So is this something that God's just preemptively punishing him for? Or is it something that his parents did something so bad that their child is now blind, and it's really punishment for them? And the answer here, Scott, is fascinating.
Yeah, it always is interesting when Jesus is the one that points out something. You almost wonder if the disciples were looking at him like, I can almost guess what he's thinking. He's looking at that guy, and he's blind. Maybe there's a reason why he's blind. Let's try to figure this out. And Jesus just answers them in verse 3, which is, to your point, just awesome. "It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must carry out the works of him who has sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And so he uses this opportunity to teach. So in the middle, he's going to go on, he's going to heal this man, which is not to ruin it for you, but he's going to heal this man. But he takes this opportunity to not only teach a principle to us in verse 3, but also to teach them and for them to understand who he is, and to begin, Tyler, this conversation from a spiritual perspective of what true blindness is. And he's going to start that here, but verse 3 is such an awesome verse. You can look at a situation from various points, and as you said in the beginning, a lot of times we just want to know why. Why is this happening? And God, so often his answer is, just trust me. Just trust me. And in this case, he says, just glorify me. It's going to be so that my works can be seen, and they can be displayed in me. I have a choice of how I'm going to act. Certainly we're talking about Jesus, so he was able to do this miracle. But in our own application, how we live our lives will determine whether or not we're showing the works of God, or if we're letting our light shine, as we would say, and having that attitude. But it is truly fascinating to me, once again, the difference between Jesus and his level and his teaching and his understanding, obviously as God, and him trying to teach men at a real time as we're reading this in the Gospels, that they're trying to learn this, and we're still trying to learn this and making sure we're applying it.
Yeah, well, I mean, how often do we face challenges, problems? Maybe we face them our whole lives. Maybe it's something that's just recently come up, and we say, well, who's to blame? Did I do something wrong? Is this because somebody else has sinned, and it's just impacting me? Is it just circumstances? God's allowing it to happen? And there could be all sorts of levels of yes, no, maybe partially to any of those things, depending, again, on the situation. But I just love that Jesus said this came about so that God's works must be displayed, that might be displayed in his life. And I have to think that that is like a next level of faith that I am striving for, and I think we all want to strive for, as we understand that each of us is from God, that we're God's children, that he wants us to live a life in his ways, walking in step and in harmony with him. We have to view our problems that we face in this way. These are certainly not pleasant, but to actually appreciate them for opportunities for God to do something amazing. And it might not be taking the thing away. It might not be solving the problem completely. For this man, it's going to be that. But we see in solving one problem, Jesus will actually bring up a whole host of other problems for this man. That he gets accosted by the Pharisees, his parents get involved. He has to make a choice about if he's going to follow Jesus and face the societal and cultural and religious persecution from the people in charge at the time. And so Jesus does solve those problems, and it might be that we still face varying things and hardships and struggles, persecutions, whatever they might be, but there's this appreciation for us being able to have the perspective of our problems, the things that we're going through, like God sees them. This isn't about pointing fingers and trying to figure out who's to blame, whose fault is this. Jesus says it's not about fault. It's about this person going through something. God's aware, God knows, God may have allowed it, but God's going to do something in this person's life. If they're willing to have the faith and trust in him, that's going to lead to something amazing, and that the works of God can be displayed in my problems and in your problems and the things that we face each day. As you mentioned, Scott, you pick up in verse 6, after he said all this, he spit on the ground, made some mud from saliva. This is one of the weirdest ways that Jesus chooses to heal. When you talk about other miracles, and Jesus doesn't even have to be in the same room. You think about the Roman centurion who wants his servant healed. He says, you don't even have to come to my house. I have that much faith in you. You just say the word and I'll go back and I'll know he'll be healed. And Jesus is like, yes, this is the kind of faith I'm looking for. Go and it's going to be done for you. He doesn't have to be in the same room. More hands-on approach, I would say. That's how I would describe this miracle. Made some mud from the saliva and spread the mud on his eyes. Verse 7, Jesus says, go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left, washed, and came back seeing. I have to imagine that some of this was for the benefit of people. Again, Jesus could have done this anyway, so there must be purpose. I'm not wise or studied enough at this point in my life to be able to, with any confidence, say this is what this is about. And I don't know that I ever will be, but even just the idea that Jesus is going to touch this man who, again, has probably been overlooked all of his life, who's never seen anything. And the fact of the matter is he has to go looking for Jesus afterwards because he's coming back seeing, but he knows Jesus' voice, but now he needs to go actually find him and see him. And to your point, there's lessons here for us with the spiritual blindness and being able to have our eyes truly opened to see the reality of who God is, what truth is, what life is about, who other people are and the value that other people have. That's a lot about what we're talking about on this program, is having the spiritual sight to see things the way that God sees them. And that includes ourselves, and that includes other people, and that certainly includes God.
Yeah, you think about the next verse where it's just the neighbors, the people that were standing there, they viewed him or saw him. So we're continuing this seeing conversation. They saw him just as a beggar. You know, this was a guy that was in the corner. They knew who he was as far as what he did. He was just a beggar. They knew he was blind, all the different things. And now, isn't not this one that was just sitting over there begging? And so there's this conversation that's going to happen now of how he's able to do this, how he's able to see. But sometimes, you know, Tyler, one of the points that I think is important for us to understand is that we have got to see opportunities rather than just simply the obstacles. There comes a point in time, and some of these may have looked at this man as an opportunity to help somebody, but like in our time today, a lot of times it's just that we walk by them, you know, and it's the Good Samaritan story kind of a thing where they're just obstacles. People are just in the way. They're obviously did something to deserve what they got, which is the question sort of in the beginning. And instead of thinking, how can I let my light shine and do what I need to do? The parents here, to your point that you made earlier, verse 22, I don't think in our culture we can understand truly what this would have been like. It says his parents said this, talking about, you can go ask him, he's of age, because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already reached the decision that if anyone confessed him to be Christ, he was to be excommunicated from the synagogue. We don't fully understand or appreciate what it was meant to be excommunicated from the synagogue. This was their culture. This was how they were known. This is how they took care of one another. All the different pieces that we really would take for granted in our time, that if it's taken away from them, what would they do? What were they going to do? And so they were afraid. It's sad that they were, but they were afraid of what was going to happen. So there's at least a piece of appreciation of that side. Now, the way that the formerly blind man, will take care of this is fascinating, and it's interesting how he'll go up to the Pharisees and basically just call them out of, do you want to follow him too? You want to follow him? You want to be one of his disciples? And they kind of had this conversation basically of saying, who are you talking to? Do you not know who we are? But in verse 34, they say at this that they put him out. They put him out. That he's going to be excommunicated for what they do. Now you have this amazing end to this story.
Yeah, and you get a lot of our hymns that are inspired by this story. You talk about Amazing Grace, I Saw the Light, all these different powerful gospel hymns that come from this realization. I love that they call him back in verse 27 to basically question him again. Like that, it's like being questioned again with the same thing. How did he open your eyes? Verse 27, I already told you, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? And like, all right, get this joker out of here. We don't know where he's from, is what the Pharisees ultimately say. And this guy says, this is an amazing thing. Like, I got my eyesight that I've never seen before. And the Pharisees will have a conversation. They are quick to point the blame. In verse 34, you were born in sin. You had this situation. Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out. So the worst case scenario happens. He's kicked out. But again, to your point, the real value comes in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and when he had found him, he asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? And you can imagine that even though he didn't see Jesus, that he heard that voice and he realized, oh, this is him. Because again, earlier they're asking this guy, where is he? Where is he? And he's, I don't know. I just heard him. I didn't see him. I could almost imagine Jesus just being a few feet away, watching things would have happened. But he didn't see him. So there's no way to point that out. And so now Jesus speaks. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Verse 36, who is he, sir, that I might believe in him? Jesus answered, you have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. You have seen him, again, for this formerly blind man. I believe, Lord, he said, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do not see will become blind. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and asked him, we aren't blind too, are we? If you were blind, Jesus told them, you wouldn't have sinned. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. This is just, again, a fascinating thing. Like, well, we're not the ones to blame. So again, this pointing the blaming game, the finger of blame at, it's not our fault. And Jesus says, well, because you're so convicted of that and you're so prideful, your guilt remains. But for this man, it's fascinating that he bows down and he worships Jesus. And you know what? Jesus doesn't say, no, I'm not God. You shouldn't do that. Like so many angels will do. Jesus receives the worship because he is God, which is just awesome. But Scott, you think about this man's life is radically changed in awesome new ways for the better. He can see. But he also, as we mentioned before, now has some new problems. He's kicked out of the synagogue. He's going to face some, perhaps, persecution. He might have some disconnection now with his family because his parents were so concerned about staying with the synagogue. And now if he's kicked out, is there going to be some issue if they are with him? And, well, he can provide for his own now. He's not blind. We don't have to look after him. So there's a whole host of things that even though this problem is solved, other worldly things might come up. But he has had the encounter. He has seen the Son of Man. He's seen the Son of God. And that makes all the difference. And he worships him. And I can see this man going on to be part of the first century church when Jesus establishes that. And it just explodes from there. It's a life truly seeing. And by the way, he could have true spiritual sight, seeing who Jesus was, and still be physically blind. And I think that's the amazing thing with any of these stories about healing with the miracles of Jesus. The lame can walk. Well, we've got people that we know, Scott, that might not be able to walk physically, but they are walking with the Lord every single day. We've got people that don't necessarily hear the best, but when they read the scripture, they're hearing the voice of Jesus, and they can recognize it because they know their Bibles so well. And that's what we all need to be, that Jesus wants to help the blind, the deaf, the lame, and the dead. Jesus raises the dead. And he wants to do that for us. He wants to make us alive to God. And so when we come to him by faith and doing what the Bible says, that's exactly what we can do. There's one detail, though, that I want to point out, Scott, before we close this episode, and it goes back to verse 4 when Jesus is explaining the situation to his disciples before he heals the man. And it's interesting, it's just this 2-letter word, we. We must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. So Jesus is obviously talking about this age, this time where Jesus' ministry, he's working with the apostles, and he's got limited time. But I think there's some application here. He doesn't say, I need to do the works of him who sent me necessarily, but we have the opportunity to do these works. And so obviously it's always God doing these things, but there's this involvement of each and every one of us looking to help people actually see. Not so much trying to focus on figuring out somebody's problem. Let me solve your problem for you, or figure out who's to blame or the reason why you're going through all these things. And we love to do that, Scott. We like to play detective, whether it's in our own issues or in other people's issues, unfortunately. But that's not our job. Our job is to help people see Jesus and to point them to realizing, look, whatever problems you're going through, God is at work. He can work. And if you trust him, he will work. And you can live a life, whatever problems might come or go, knowing that you are from God. Thanks for listening. Show your support by leaving a review on your podcast app, and share this episode with someone you want to encourage. If you have questions or would like to get in touch with us, go to youarefromgod.com. That's youarefromgod.com.